Hani and Bonjour. I'm Loretta Ross, Treaty Commissioner at the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. I want to welcome you to the second part of our speaker series, Moving Forward Together, Building on the Spirit and Intent of the Treaties. In our first series, we had presentations and discussions with elders and academics on the spirit and intent of the treaties, and hope to set the foundation for the discussion on moving forward. Today, we will be discussing treaties with individuals from different sectors of the community and gaining their perspective on treaties and what they understand is needed to move forward. Today's guest is Hani Ataan Al-Ubeady. Hani is the former project director for Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, whose mandate and vision is to create a welcoming and inclusive community where Indigenous and newcomers can fully participate. Hani has been a community activist for nearly 20 years. His goal is to remove barriers on the path of creating a welcoming community for all and deconstruct negative narratives around newcomers and Indigenous communities. He is currently a cross-cultural mental health specialist and community-based research director. Welcome, Hani.
Thank you.
So, you've been involved in some of the work that the Commission has done and in your former role with Immigration Partnership Winnipeg. There was a project on developing a toolkit for newcomers about Indigenous people. Can you maybe describe a bit about this project?
Sure. So the project came as a result to identifying certain gaps through my work while I was working with the newcomers in early years. And by early years, I would be specific and say probably late 90s, early 2000s. And what we have noticed that the newcomers start coming up with phrases and questions that normally we don't ask in polite conversations because may deem or it could be understood as either racist or bear some types of discriminations. And so for that reason, I felt like there's need for either finding out what's going on. Why would people just after a week of their arrival start developing opinions that either misinformed or very negative? And so we tried to find out what's going on. And obviously, when you do a very specific job, you would not have the chance to explore it, and you have the capacity in terms of research and engaging people in that type of work to find out what's actually going on. And so we've done some of that work in terms of community engagement on a kind of a micro level, I would say. And then in 2016, when I have a different chance and opportunity to work in different capacity with the newcomer populations in Winnipeg, I also felt these type of opinions and misinformation not only increased, but also it took different type of curve. And that is now they feel, some people, I don't want to live where what they actually call them, native people. I don't want to live where the natives are. And also there are some gaps that you can feel when people move into a certain areas, let's say North End. Then you find a little bit of a clash or conflict between some of the newcomers and some of the Indigenous people who live in the area. We tried to find out what's going on here, why this is happening. So we had a research done. And the research, really, sometimes we don't need research to tell you what is actually going on, except to confirm and affirm what you already know.
Yeah.
And then the result was, yes, there is some concerns, and those concerns are big. And if they are left and dealt with, it could lead to a bigger gap.
So, when as a newcomer coming to Canada and coming to Manitoba, is there a lot of information that you receive about First Nations people, about Indigenous people in Canada or different parts of Canada?
Well, to be perfectly clear, I can speak for myself and the people that I know. When before arrival, we had zero information about Indigenous people. The only information we knew about Indigenous people is through the TV, media, movies. And these images in the movies are not necessarily attractive or positive about the indigenous people. And so this is the only information we had. And also we didn't have the interest or the need to pursue such a thing. So we came to this country, to Canada, and we felt, you know what, my focus is how do you get education, employment, and establish a family possibly down the road. And none of your immediate goals would capture the curiosity about indigenous people or their cultures. So we don't have the information on an individual level based on personal curiosity or so on, or an organized method in terms of orientation being prepared and delivered to us prior to arrival. And therefore, our information is not only limited, non-existent. And so we came, we noticed, we observed what's going on, and some of us build those negative opinions about indigenous people, and some of us just became indifferent and moved on. And that's the current harsh reality, unfortunately. Well, not the current, but I would say the reality when I arrived, and then that's many years back. Now it's a little bit different story.
And there's not a lot to contradict those stereotypes or some of those negative images. And things are changing. But I mean, for the longest time, there probably wasn't much, or was there much to contradict and help to form a more fuller understanding and appreciation of the original peoples?
It's very correct. Absolutely. It is one, as I said, there is no much of information to start with, and two, no much of motivation to learn, and there is no organized way of delivering, let's say, an orientation or an educational session. So you're left on your own, basically, and whatever you can form of opinions is really your own endeavor, I would say. So yes, like there's a huge, I would say there's a huge need for some sort of package of information or whatever you want to call it, orientation or info session for newcomers to at least have the chance to learn about the basics of about the indigenous people of this land. And one would expect that to happen prior arrival, but we didn't have the chance to learn about these things. So yeah.
And so the toolkit, thus comes along the toolkit and the need for the toolkit. And so tell us a little bit more about how the toolkit is laid out and how development went into its creation.
So, look, the toolkit, I think it is based on the things that we just mentioned, which is the real need to learn about indigenous people. Why? For very practical reasons. Practical reasons are if newcomers continue to come to this country and settle in this country and with zero information about indigenous people, in Winnipeg, we will have bigger number of like misinformed people who share the very same space with indigenous people. Well, think about it. Is that an inclusive, is that a cohesive society, or very divisive and probably problematic down the road? And so for that practical reason, one needs to act and do something about it. The toolkit is really an educational tool to educate ourselves as newcomers, but also the larger society. Because my friends who are born and raised in this country, they don't know more than I actually do about the indigenous people. Why? Because they didn't have the chance to learn either in school. And nowadays it's different, but I'm talking about the people in their 40s probably now and older. So that's one thing, and that is essential. But the toolkit, the reason for the toolkit is to actually is for us to educate ourselves so we can coexist in peace and also call ourselves citizens of this land and do something about something like living and sharing the space with people, and especially the people of the land, the first people of the land. So yes, the indigenous orientation toolkit, I think, is essential beyond education. It is important beyond information. It has a practical end. And for that reason, I feel like this type of work needs to continue. This type of work needs to be supported because for the reasons that I mentioned, but also for our new generation to kind of celebrate the strength and know more about the indigenous people, learn from them. And also, I'm hoping that one day the indigenous peoples themselves have the chance to learn about the newcomers, which is also a very diverse and large population in Canada.
And that's that reciprocity as well that comes with the treaties. It's learning about each other, and so it's continual renewal. So the toolkit, as you said, it's not just for those that are recent arrivals and settling. It's those that have been here also for generations who have built up a certain image about First Nations people, and those are tough stereotypes in many ways to overcome. And other than the toolkit, are you finding a lot of uptake and a lot of traction from the newcomer community to want to learn?
Look, I think from my experience working with the newcomers, but also myself being as a newcomer, there's, as if it is a natural tendency to build on the curiosity that one can trigger in a newcomer population towards indigenous people. There's really a genuine intent on the newcomer side, I would say, and I'm talking probably the majority of people that I know. They would really want to learn more about indigenous people because for one simple reason, the minute that they learn that this land actually is the land of the indigenous people, they start asking questions. So what's going on? Why do I see people who are in need and staggering around Main Street and Central Park area and so on and so forth? What's going on here? If this is their land, how come this is happening? Lots of people ask these questions, and that positive curiosity get triggered, and for that, one would say, okay, a positive answer is needed. It's an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity, and that's why I don't struggle with people when they struggle so much trying to define reconciliation. And to me, I say, you don't have to worry about the definition for now. You know why. You ask yourself, why do we need reconciliation? And if you know why, then start doing whatever you can. Even the smallest thing, which is curiosity. And I think that exists now in the newcomer population, which is very positive.
So, I mean, it kind of segues into my next question in terms of how do we build bridges, or why do you think it's so important to build bridges between newcomers and the Indigenous communities?
So again, maybe for practical, very pragmatic reasons, I would say, look, if I have children and I want them to live on this land, it only makes sense that my children will live in a peaceful manner, in a just way, and an informative way with the rest of the people that they share the place with. Let alone the moral and the ethical responsibility that I think is huge to talk about, is really large. And it probably needs days to finish talking about it. And that is we, the beneficiaries, the newcomers and non-newcomers, all comers and the newcomers, we are the beneficiaries of treaties. We're the beneficiaries of the privileges associated to being on this land. And for that reason, it only makes sense that we take also develop some sense of responsibility towards that. You cannot possibly just be privileged to live on a land like this and you call yourself citizen or community member without developing that sense of responsibility as to how this is happening. This happened and we arrived to this conclusion. And that's why, to me, I find it is very ethically challenging to walk down Main Street or go to the Central Park and all that, and you see some of the indigenous members being in a very, very deplorable situation due to some socioeconomic and intergeneration trauma related to past injustices or harm. You can walk away from that. You cannot say I have nothing to do with that. We have responsibility towards that simply because we share the same community, same society, same nation.
Do you see a lot of commonalities between newcomers and First Nations people or Indigenous people in general?
Yes, there are lots of commonalities, and those commonalities act as a bridge or bridges through which relationships and all reconciliation efforts can be made. I'll give you an example. Lots of the newcomer refugees that I worked with, I came into contact with, many of them celebrate the fact that they have oral tradition, storytelling, the concept of family and the extended family. All of these elements exist in the indigenous tradition, which they are existed in the many of the newcomer traditions. And so when the minute a conversation or a space is given for a conversation to happen, you find a newcomer and indigenous person, they click in easy. And an empathy, a genuine empathy starts to build. And how do we know that? We've been doing it for years. And I witnessed and observed and also experienced it. And that's why I personally have lots of indigenous friends. And I call them friends because I wasn't afraid to take that step towards this genuine conversation. And through that genuine conversation, we found out that we have lots in common and many, many different ways of connection. So, yes.
So what is your understanding of the treaties and the treaty relationship? And how do you see that as maybe helping to continue to educate, to get over perhaps some of the fear that stereotypes often leave, within us? Does that understanding of the treaties help to overcome some of that fear and work to build curiosity rather than to say that's not my problem?
Right. I think the way I understood treaty or treaties is I see them as promises. And in many cultures, including the one that I belong to, I was reading about our own heritage and tradition, and I found out that actually there's the covenant. Like when you make a covenant or promise, you better stick to it. You better stick to it. You cannot possibly deviate from that. And if you deviate from that, it is in itself would constitute that characteristic of deviation from that promise delivery. It will put you in a category of hypocrisy. And I thought it was striking to me. And I was thinking, wow, there's actually ethical responsibility attached to not only knowing what the treaty is all about, but also acting on them and delivering the promises that attach to it. So my hope is we as a society, the Canadian society, I hope one day we will, and I think that I see lots of people, which is very promising, very positive, start to pay attention to these type of things, the way that I just described, and they are wanting to, genuinely wanting to know more, so they can do more in terms of reconciliation, in terms of connection, also understanding what the treaty is all about. So my hope is that we will understand treaties beyond just an agreement or just a piece of paper between two groups of people and is old. I don't see it as an old. I see it as a living document, a living promise that impacts us all. And in order for us to know what that impact is all about, we need to understand it. And in order for us to understand it, we need to educate ourselves. And in order for us to be educated, we need to open a space for the indigenous people to educate us on what the treaty is all about. But we need to take responsibility towards that learning process. And I think some of that is happening, and I'm feeling very positive about it.
That was kind of leading to, my next question in terms of the change or the progress or the improvements that are being made in your community, in the newcomers community, towards their view of Indigenous peoples. I mean, the view is one thing, and then it's taking that action, right? It's going to the next step and making friends or working in the community, even if it's your own community, to raise awareness. Do you see positive change occurring?
Short answer is yes. The long answer, of course, we need days to explain what that means. But in short, I would say, in newcomers, they want to learn more. That's for sure. There's a real and genuine curiosity about that. They want to learn more. They want to learn more about the past. They want to learn more about treaties. They want to learn more about their responsibilities because now they are feeling, you know what? I'm sorry that I'm living on this land, and I hear that. I hear this comment just recently from a newcomer person. They were apologizing for not knowing, and I think one would think, you know what? We need to come up with a way that allow a better, a healthier dialogue in nationwide, where we all can talk about what does positive change look like for all of us. And I think we have so many opportunities to make that happen. And so to answer your question, yes, I see the number of newcomers wanting to learn is getting bigger and bigger. Also, non-newcomers, also, I see them joining into the conversation, which is absolutely fabulous. I see a real curiosity, a genuine intent in terms of learning. But there's also some inhibition or some hesitation because a feeling of feeling guilty, ashamed, and so on and so forth. I think we need to create a space where people they feel they're part of a conversation that is a learning conversation. So we all learn, and not to feel guilty if you miss a specific part of the answer or you don't formulate the question in a certain way. But we're still in the beginning of a very long path, I would say. The newcomers are very curious. The newcomers are very willing to learn, and they're taking steps towards that. So I'm very, very positive about it.
Do you find, like you had mentioned that before you came, there's certain images and certain stereotypes about First Nation people or Indigenous people. Is that a place, and do you see a lot of work happening at that end? And is that an area perhaps where we can start focusing? I mean, the toolkit is for once you're here.
Yeah.
And there's more and more stuff for that. It's kind of a two-part question. One is there things that we can be doing before you come? And secondly, is some of those that are already here, talking to family and friends or people that are coming, is that another way that education or creating change and positive relations can be done or is being done?
Right. So far, I don't think we have pre-arrival comprehensive orientation or info sessions done to newcomers or offered to newcomers about the Indigenous peoples in Canada. So that's probably, if there's something, probably there's a little on a smaller scale. But what we need something that in a form of celebration to celebrate the cultures and what the Indigenous peoples' tradition is all about, and allow newcomers and also the countries where the newcomers exist or lived to know about Indigenous people. And I think Canada is trying. I feel like there's some attempts for us as a nation trying to kind of now celebrating what Indigenous peoples and traditions all about. We have lots to do, obviously. We still didn't start, I think. These are just probably glimpses of hope, but the real work is still ahead. So yes, we need something pre-arrival. Canada is receiving hundreds of thousands of newcomers. They are not only refugees. The refugees is a very small, tiny percentage of the newcomers, but I would say in a matter of maybe 3-4 years, you will have over 1 million people arriving, and that's a positive thing because Canada needs people for many different economic reasons. But to go back to the very point that he made, and that is, do we need pre-arrival orientation? Yes. Why? Because the number of people who need it is really large, and they will end up coming here. That's very simple equation. And two is this second thing that what we're doing here after arrival is good, but there's lots of work is needed to happen to even enlarge it and make it bigger and possibly reach wider and larger number of people.
What are some of the challenges in in being able to do that? And do you see any of like anything specific, or are they just kind of general?
I think, like any other system, that if you want to work, you have to work through the system, like the immigration department, because the immigration eventually is the one that making decision in terms of admission, in terms of interviews, in terms of the procedure of one would be admitted into Canada from A to Z. And so, in order for any group of people trying to establish, let's say, a pre-arrival orientation on Indigenous people to potential newcomers, it has to go through the government channels, in this case, specifically speaking, the immigration department. I think the immigration department, and I can't speak for them, but I think there's some, while I was working on the Indigenous Orientation Toolkit, we started a little bit of work on that specific. This is like we had a conversation or two about what do we need to do with respect to pre-arrival orientation. So they are aware, and that conversation need to be revisited, also expanded, and create some action plan to make it happen for the reasons and needs that we mentioned.
So, I mean, there was some really great work done with respect to the toolkit. And I mean, there's no uniform process or comprehensive process across the country to be able to have information like was done in the toolkit. Did you find from, contacts or other newcomer organizations across either the province or across the country, people interested in the toolkit and that type of work to be able to facilitate better understanding?
Absolutely. There's a great interest. I was in different conferences in many different provinces. I would say maybe since the toolkit was developed, maybe I would say at least three provinces. And in those conferences or places, there's a great interest and thirst for that information. The minute you talk about Indigenous Orientation Toolkit, people become curious. They want to know more about it. They want to know how to obtain it, how they use it, and so on and so forth. So there's real interest. The question is, how do you satisfy that interest?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the toolkit, of course, is one tool, right? I mean, it's a tool. It's one process, and I know that you continue. You're not there anymore, so it's not fair to keep asking you questions about the toolkit and its success. But what other kinds of things are you involved with? Because people always say, "What can I do?
Right.
What can I do? I can't develop a toolkit. I can perhaps attend a workshop or do, but what other types of things either you can suggest to people, and what other things are you involved with? Because you've built quite a relationship with the Indigenous community, First Nation community, and work collaboratively on other things.
Look, after I finished my work with this project, with the Indigenous Orientation Toolkit, and I moved on, and now it's a few years, right? I didn't stop just because it was a project. I considered it a personal commitment based on very simple, recognized ethical requirement. It's as simple as this. As I said earlier, I'm the beneficiary of what the treaties and this land offer. I need to do something back. I need to offer something. I need to develop sense of responsibility, not only towards what happened to the Indigenous people, but also to the nation that I consider myself part of now. I'm a citizen of Canada. What does that actually mean? What do I need to do? So what did I do? I'm still having connection to my Indigenous friends and others, and those people are active. The people that I'm connected with, they're action oriented. They don't just sit in long meetings and they produce nothing. They are people who sit in meetings and thinking, what do I need to do next in terms of action? So the example of that, Turtle Island Project, developed by Indigenous members. I supported that work, brought the immigration perspective or the immigrant, the newcomer perspective to it, to enhance it, because the immigration obviously provide a larger number of people coming to Canada, and these are potential citizens, and then they will be interacting with Indigenous people. So that is an example of action-based, I would say, personal endeavor, I would say. And so The project is taken off, is delivered, people are benefiting from it, and it is not necessarily organized or hosted by a specific organization. It's just a group of indigenous members, in addition to a few friends, sat together, put in another form of tool, educational toolkit, I would say, but it's experiential one. And probably, I mean, I'm going to get engaged in different ones. And I do that besides my own job, my other job, and being a family man and so on and so forth. The reason for it, simply because we need to continue the work that we need to continue. And that's essential.
You know, one of the elders that I work with, have the fortune of working with, say that treaty is, you live treaty every day, right? It's not an intellectual exercise that we learn about in the classroom. It's not only the experiential experiences that we have and learn. It's living every day. So it kind of goes to what you're talking about as well, with that responsibility to ensure that I'm doing well, but I'm also ensuring that other people are doing well. My treaty partner, right? And
That's
you, as newcomers, become a treaty partner. You've signed on to this because you've come to these lands and these territories. So it's incumbent upon you to learn about it, and you know you have to fit it into your busy schedule, as you've described with yours. But you know, it's getting people to understand that and to overcome some of those
Now,
fears
the
as
good
well.
thing is now the citizenship oath for the newcomers includes some reference to treaties, right? And that's good. So make this ask them, what does that mean? What do you need to do after that?
Yeah, and I guess that's another question. Do you think, I mean, that's very recent, right? That's
very
in the
recent.
last little while, so it's kind of hard to gauge
Yeah.
the impact. But I mean, it creates the question, well, what is that all about? And what does that mean?
That's right. I think my hope is we don't stay in the cliches and just words. People need to understand what they say and what they're committing themselves to. And that's the sense of responsibility. The privilege is to live on a land like this one. The sense of responsibility is doing something about harms that associated with past injustices or whatever you want to call them. But you need, and then also to contribute to improve the current situation, whether for the indigenous people or others, but working together because we all exist in one society. As simple as this. There are no boundaries between us.
Exactly. We have to see each other at Tim Hortons or at the
Like,
Forks or wherever.
yeah,
It's
you
work,
share
we understand.
you share the cake. At least share the praise about who cooks it, right?
Great.
Yeah.
One of the, I don't know if we would call it a slogan, but one of the phrases we often talk about when we talk about treaties and bringing people in is the idea that we're all treaty people. And I don't know if that's caught on yet in the newcomer society, or if there's conversation about, well, what does that mean? Or if there's even a response to it, because it's intended to be inclusive, right? It's bringing us all into this relationship. And what is your sense of that?
I would say, realistically speaking, I don't think the newcomers is quite there yet. Why, in terms of we're all treaty people. I think many of them would ask, what does that actually mean? They still don't know. So that's why I'm saying basic conversations, just conversations about treaties as promises. Promises for on what? And these are the basic things. It is very much needed. And so the newcomers probably they hear about treaties, but they don't know why they are part of it because they just arrived. Some of them say, "Hey, I've been here for 2, 3 years. What do I know about treaties?" But then if you explain to them the larger picture and what it means for the person to live here and enjoy what has been established of benefits and so on and so forth, and if you want to just explain it in a very economic sense, which I don't rely on that, but I'm saying basic conversation is needed, not only to educate people but also to connect with them so they understand what we're treaty people and so on and so forth. They understand it from personal perspective, not necessarily from academic or historical or fact-based research or so on and so forth. But it is we're talking about I'm connecting with the piece of information, or now it makes sense to me, and now I'm going to do something about it. As simple as this. And many of them are getting it, but we're still in the beginning. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of reciprocal education that needs to happen. I've heard on occasion, I'm here and I'm working so hard to make a good life
Yeah.
for myself, and why can't the First Nation people? Or I hear, from First Nation people, we have newcomers and they're entitled and they have all
Yes.
of this opportunity that's provided to them,
Yes.
and we're forgotten about.
Right.
And so, it's kind of two sides of the same coin in many ways, but there's
Yes.
still a lot, I think, that needs to happen between the respective communities.
Absolutely. And I think if you leave people on their own to figure this out, it's good and bad.
Yeah.
Good because people will kind of find a way that connect with them. But it's bad because it's not organized or funded or supported or like it's not a systemic in it or systemized in a way that ensure good delivery and outcome. And for that reason, I feel it is an endeavor or a project that is supposed to engage government, civil society, community, and grassroots, all of us in it. Why? Because to keep that momentum going. So it's not left on Hani's will. Well, if Hani feels good today, he will do something about it. Well, if he gets a bigger job and he get busy, you forget about all of the things. That's not sustainable way of doing things. The things that you mentioned in terms of stereotypes about from both sides, if you sit with them individually, they make sense. If I sit with a newcomer and listen to their logic towards individual, they make perfect sense. I'm not going to challenge them. Why I'm not going to challenge? Because they are factual. I'm not going to sit and say, look, what you see in Central Park or on Main Street is not true. You're imagining. That's not true. It's factual. There are people who are on Main Street in a very bad situation that they need help, they need support, and whatever the case may be. And also, I can't tell a newcomer, don't live next to someone who is, for example, alcoholic and destructive. I can't say that. And I can't say it doesn't exist because this is not real. Now, if I go to the indigenous person and I sit with them and I say, well, you know what? You are right. The newcomers are getting support. Of course, different newcomers get different support, but you are right. These two stories, those two narratives, if they don't get a bridge, we will have problem.
We'll have problems.
The minute you bridge them, the empathy start to develop, understanding get bigger, and then they start saying, oh, that's why. So I saw that angle of the story, but I didn't see the other angle of it. And that's why conversation is very, very important to have, and that dialogue continue to happen. Because isolated narratives can be dangerous. Connected ones can make sense.
And just, lastly, talking about the increase in newcomers coming over the next little while, up to 1 million people, and more and more, there's some sense of urgency in many ways to be able to start making those connections and building those bridges that need to occur.
Absolutely.
Because we all have to live here. We all have to share
Work
these.
needs to happen yesterday, not today.
Yeah.
Like, work needs to happen. We don't have time to waste because decades passed already. So
Yeah.
we have lots to catch up on. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Miigwech, thank you so much, Hani, for coming and sharing your experience and your knowledge and your plans and the continued work that you're doing in building those bridges. I really appreciate you coming and sharing with us and spending that time to us. It's clear that there's so much we have to learn, in that treaty relationship, and building upon those to make a better place for everyone here. So, Miigwech, thank you again.
Big wish to you, and also thank you very much. I want to say that people like you and your team not only encouraging for us as a newcomers to work, but also motivating. Also informative and welcoming. And the indigenous people, like, look, I worked with you before, and I worked with your team and other indigenous people. that sense of welcoming is huge, very important. This is so encouraging. It gives us that energy to keep learning more, doing more. And I think you, like for that, I would say thank you because you're doing that silent action, I would say. Because the action of encouraging, the action of welcoming, the action of sharing, and through that we are start to produce something that is useful not only to ourselves but to the society and including of course the indigenous community. So thank you again. Yeah.
Wonderful. Miigwech.
Thank you.